Hey guys, it's Derek. Today we're going to be looking at how to set up a very simple architecture to run, a theoretical web application while sticking to the principle of high availability, which again in a nutshell just means that your applications are available when you need them, regardless of what's going on with, the data centers they're being kind of hosted at. So how we're going to do that is we're going to work our way to this final product here. This is what our final architecture would look like. We're going to have our overarching VPC, right? This is kind of where everything lives, your virtual private cloud. Within here, we've got two availability zones, right? We've got 1 and 2. Within each availability zone, there is a EC2 compute instance, and then there's a RDS database instance. But because they are in different availability zones, they are completely separated. So if there was like an earthquake or something to happen to, availability zone 1 and just completely put it out of commission, then you could easily fail over to availability zone 2, which, remember, availability zones are, physical locations of kind of a cluster of data centers within an AWS region. They're physically separated so that if, again, something were to happen to one, you could still rely on the others to run your application. So what that would look like is if your application was running in availability zone 1 and it's put out of commission for whatever reason, you could easily just switch your application over to run in availability zone 2 with the same exact resources set up, right? Your instance, compute instance and your database instance, and then you're good to go. So you minimize downtime, you minimize data loss. So let's take a look at how to actually do that. So we're going to hop into the AWS console. You'll want to get signed in if you're going to follow along. And we need to do two things here. We need to create our EC2 instances, and we also need to create our RDS instances. So if you come in here to EC2, we'll get those out of the way first. I'm just going to go down here to launch instance. And let's maybe call this test instance AZ1. Since we're really just looking at, high availability, we're not going to concern ourselves too much with the type of instance you can run or set up, but as you can see, there's quite a few. So we'll just kind of stick to the default here, and we'll make sure we're using the free tier, because again, we're not going to actually be using this. We just want to set it up. Don't need a key pair because we're not going to be actually accessing anything here. So if we actually come in here, this is where we're going to specify our availability zone for this particular instance. So if you click a subnet here, you can see there's different subnets. And essentially what a subnet is it's think of it as a basket inside of your availability zone that can hold resources. So ideally what we would be doing is we would have our database instances in a private subnet, so they couldn't be accessed by just anyone. And then we would have our compute instances in a public subnet, so they could host our application or program or whatever it is. But again, we're not going to concern ourselves too much about that. We just want to set it up in different availability zones. So I'm just going to use US East 1A for this first instance. So again, what that means is that it is in the US East region. It's in the 1A availability zone. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. We'll go ahead and just leave everything else kind of as it is. Again, we're not too concerned about anything except high availability today. Advanced details, again, we can just leave these at their defaults. And let's just go ahead and make sure everything looks good over here. T2, and it does look good. Yep. Let's go ahead and click launch instance. Looks like it's going to want us to do a key pair, so I'm just going to say don't use one, because we're not going to be logging in. Normally you would want to generate a EC2 key pair if you're going to like SSH or actually access this instance, but we're not doing that. We just want to set it up. So let's come back over here. You can see that our first instance is created. It's still, kind of running through some status checks. But as you can see, it's in US East 1A, right? So now we can say that we have this instance right here set up. This will be availability zone 1A. And we need to do one more instance, right? Because we want to do it in a different availability zone. So I'm just going to go ahead and select launch instances again. We'll do the same thing. Let's call this test instance AZ2. And same thing, we'll just kind of leave these at their default. Make sure we're in the free tier. Let's say we don't want to key pair. Let's click edit. And in the subnet, let's go ahead and do availability zone 1B. We did 1A for the last one. Let's do 1B here. And again, leave just kind of all these at their defaults. And select launch instance. Should only take a few seconds. All right, let's go view our instances. So now you can see that we have our first instance in US East 1A. And US East 1B. So for some reason, let's just say US East 1B was just struck by a lightning storm, it's out of commission, doesn't work anymore, everything's failing. You can set your applications and your EC2 instances to automatically start using this US East 1A. The configuration is a little out of scope for this course, but just know that for high availability, right, your applications can remain available by automatically switching to a different availability zone, all right? So we've got our EC2 compute instances up, so we're going to now go ahead and we need to set up our database instances in each zone. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go to the RDS console. And then once this opens up, this will see if you don't have any databases, which I currently don't for this particular account. So we'll hit create database. And similarly to when we were setting up our EC2 instances, we're not going to be too concerned about, how we configure it, kind of what specifications we put on it. We're just going to use a lot of the defaults. So Postgres, perfect. Again, let's make sure we do the free tier so we can not, pay for what we don't necessarily want to pay for. Settings, we can, again, leave most of these at the default. You're not going to be connecting into this database, so we don't actually even need to set any of that. Instance configuration, that looks okay. Storage, that looks okay. All right, so now we come down to the connectivity section, which is kind of like the networking section. This is where we're going to find, where we actually locate our database to. So as you can see, we're just in the default VPC. Every AWS account comes with a default VPC. It's generally recommended you make your own though, but that's fine for this demo. And for the subnet group, we're just going to kind of leave that as it is. Again, you could select, like if you have multiple private subnet groups, you could select which of those you want this particular instance to live in. But now if we come down here to availability zone, again, you can see that we have all these different options. So we set our compute instances up to live in availability zone 1A and 1B. So that's the same thing we're going to do here. So let's set this first one to US East 1A. Again, we can leave all this at the default, except this, where I'm just going to turn off performance insights. We don't need any of that. And let's just make sure that this looks okay and everything's the defaults. Yep, free tier. I'm just going to give this probably a better name. So test DBAZ1. Perfect. All right, let's hit create database. Looks like it wants us to put in a password here. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that in, but we won't actually ever use it. which is totally fine with me because we're just going to delete it here in a bit anyways after we get it set up. So this will, yep, that's cool. Nope, we're good. So as you can see now, we have our first database here living in US East 1A, right? It even tells you region and availability zone. US East is the region, and 1A is going to be, or sorry, US East 1 is the region. It's North Virginia region, and then A is the availability zone. So that's number one. We need to do one more though. As you can see, this is going to take a few minutes, but it's totally okay. We'll just go ahead and work on our next one while that's finishing up. And once we get into here, kind of the same thing. Let's just take a bunch of the defaults, jump into the free tier. Let's call this test dbaz2. Let's put in that password again here. And again, all these are totally fine for their defaults. Leave that at the default, and down here availability zone we're going to do 1B since that's what we did our second instance into. Let's turn off performance insights, and let's go ahead and create this database. Okay, thanks again. I'm good. So now as you can see, we've got two database servers, two relational database servers running on Postgres. They're completely separated, and each one is in its own availability zone, right? So they are physically separated, which is great because once again, if something were to happen to US East 1A, you could still keep running your applications on US East 1B, no big deal. So now that we have all of this set up, we have arrived at our end goal of getting our final architecture in place. We've got two compute instances and two database instances, each one paired in their own availability zone, so they are completely separate from each other. And our application that would be running on these compute instances does indeed have high availability. All right. So that's all we need to do to get a highly available web application. But let's go ahead and tear down some of these resources so we aren't incurring unnecessary charges. So I'm going to come back in here so you can see those are both running. Of course, if you were to leave these running, it is in the free tier, so it's free up into a point. If you were to just leave these running forever, obviously it would start charging you. So we're just going to go ahead and get rid of these. So if we go here, and if we go to manage instance state, we can go ahead and stop this. That's totally okay. And let's go ahead and stop the other one, and then we can go ahead and terminate them both. All right, so now they're stopped. So now let's go ahead and terminate this. That's okay. And same thing down here. Let's go ahead and terminate this. Okay, that's fine. All right, so you can see here terminated, and this one's in the process of being terminated. It's shutting down, so yep, terminated now. So those are both gone, and we won't incur any charges for them. So now let's see if these databases are done setting up. So we can go ahead and terminate those as well, and it looks like they are. So let's go ahead and I'm going to delete this one. We don't want to create a final snapshot. We don't want to retain any backups. And we acknowledge that once we delete it, since we're not backing it up, we can't get anything. And it just wants to have us, again, confirm that we actually want to delete it. I do. You can see it's deleting there. And one more time here. Don't want that. That's okay. Delete. Perfect. And we can see that one's deleting as well. All right, so that is how you set up a highly available setup. Of course, you could expand on that. You could maybe add like a third availability zone. You could add other servers in that availability zone as well. So if one server were to fail in availability zone, you just use another server. But the point of high availability is to make sure that your applications are available when you need them, and the way to do that is to have redundancy. All right, so thanks for following along. Hopefully it was helpful, and we'll see you next time.